David, are you saying that the United States Army discovered free energy on its very first satellite launch and then never told anybody? Is that true?
Jordan, it is true. That's exactly what I'm saying. The evidence is overwhelming that this is actually what happened. And now we present this historic, true story. Keep watching. You don't want to miss this.
He was the wizard of 1,000 kings, and I chanced to meet him one night wandering. He told me tales, and he drank my wine. Me and my magic man kind of feeling fine. He had a cloak of gold and eyes of fire, and when he spoke I felt his deep desire to free the world from its fear and pain, and help the people to feel free again. Why don't we listen to the voices in our heart? 'Cause then I know we'll find we're not that far apart. Everybody's got to be happy, everyone should sing, 'cause we know the joy of life, the peace that love can bring. Thus spoke the wizard in his mountain home. Vision of his wisdom means we'll never be alone, and I will dream on my magic night, and the million silver stars that guide me with their light.
Hi, and welcome to this video, number 19 in the David Alexander Infinite Energy series. David, this sounds like quite the big scoop. Tell us more, please.
It is a big scoop. We are dependent for the information here from Richard Hoagland on his website, and we link to all of our sources. This concerns his story of the inside information related to the launch of Explorer 1, which was the first United States satellite, and a huge discovery that was made during the first orbit but never revealed.
A huge discovery made during the first U.S. launch into space that has never been revealed. That ties into some very legendary and important history for this country and its entire field of science and technology.
I would say so. The background information related to that launch of Explorer 1 began a few months earlier in October 1957, and I clearly remember going out on the porch of my house picking up the newspaper And the headlines this high said, Russia launches Earth satellite. This was not expected. I think it shocked many people in America, the United States of America, and collectively the whole country. This was a big surprise.
Wow. Was there what did we do? Was there a response?
Well, the nation's pride was hurt, and then the launch of Vanguard 1 was the first response, and that ended up in a disaster. That missile, that rocket went up about a foot, came back down, blew up in a big ball of fire. That was the Navy's launch of a satellite that big. Didn't work.
This big?
That big.
So double whammy. First the Russians beat us, and then our attempt failed. What did we do?
So it was then up to the United States Army missile team in Huntsville, Alabama, and they were under the direction of Wernher von Braun, who shortly became very famous, and they would launch a satellite. They said they would do that. The problem was they had no real upper stages to put up atop the main booster. So they improvised. They used a lot of little solid rockets to make the second, third, and fourth stage. The fourth stage was actually a single, these were solid fuel rockets, was bolted right to the satellite itself.
So after the Navy failed, it was the Army's turn.
Army's turn.
And you know, we know all about the rivalry between the Army and the Navy. It's almost like they had to not only prove the U.S. Better than Russia or regain our honor, but also to defend their own honor.
Well, there it was again, and it was their turn. So, the day was January 31, 1958, and they called it the Jupiter C rocket. Jupiter was the main booster rocket, and C meant a complex of other smaller rockets on top of it. It launched from Cape Canaveral, Florida, 10:48 p.m. Eastern Time. And the orbit was planned to be a low point 220 miles and a high point 1,000 miles. Now in those days, satellites were new. There were no satellite tracking stations, so people with radio receivers that attuned to the frequency broadcast by the satellite were waiting in California. And when they heard the signal of the satellite coming over the California coast, that was near the completion of the first orbit. So that was what people were waiting for. And then there were phone lines connecting to the missile launch team in Florida and to the Pentagon, where Wernher von Braun and other high officials were anxiously awaiting, hoping for a success.
Okay, and I mean, that all sounds very well planned out. We know it worked, so where is the story here?
Well, we know it worked after it worked. But the story is, if you imagine yourself back then there waiting for that first orbit to be completed, as the people in California were.
And von Braun waiting for a phone call.
Waiting for that phone call. So the expected time was 12:30 a.m. the next day, February 1, 1958. And 12:30 a.m. came and went. 12:31, 12:32, 12:33, 12:34, and it really, at that time, at that place, it didn't look good at all. And the moods of people was turning very dark and in despair. And once again,
so here we are and waiting for the satellite, it's not showing up, and staring failure and despair in the eyes
Again.
again.
So it couldn't have looked any darker, but unexpectedly, even miraculously, the radio signal was heard at 12:42. A full 12 minutes late, but it was there.
So it did show up, but it was a full 12 minutes late after a flight that didn't even last for 2 hours?
Right. That
Was there an explanation?
no, not then and never later. So at the 2 a.m. news conference held at the National Academy of Sciences in Washington, D.C., no one asked why the apogee, the high point of the orbit, turned out to be 1,600 miles instead of 1,000 miles. And actually no one seemed to care, because finally the U.S. did launch a satellite in orbit. They were back in the game, and that was what was important.
So here you have a rather large discrepancy between what was calculated and what actually happened, and no one questioned it. It was as if the public looked at it as a bonus.
Well, as a bonus, Americans do things big, so there it was. But to keep people in the U.S. space program, especially Wernher von Braun, what was going on was a huge problem.
I can imagine that. What do you think he was thinking? What was the problem for him?
Well, the problem was this, that the upper stages above the main booster, they were calculated to provide 3,500 feet per second. That's the final amount of velocity to get the satellite into orbit. But instead of that, they delivered 4,100 feet per second, an extra 600 feet per second, and that resulted in actually an extra 600 miles altitude of the high point of the orbit. So when you looked at the numbers, this was an extra 17% more energy than was available chemically in those solid fuel rockets. And that energy had to be coming from an unknown source.
So that's our free energy.
That's our free energy. That's what this channel is about.
It had to come from somewhere or show up somewhere.
Right. So
did it happen again, David? Like, seeing this once is puzzling, but then you could write it off as a fluke of some sort. But did they see it again?
Actually turned out to be a pattern. The rest of the Explorer series of satellites experienced the same thing, where they calculated an orbit, but it came out to be higher. And then the Vanguard satellites, they finally got them working. They also resulted in higher orbits than was calculated. And then there were early attempts by the United States to send a rocket to the vicinity of the moon, or even crash on the moon, and they would get to the place for the interception of the moon ahead of time.
So they were going too fast?
Too fast. They're all going too fast, and it was a persistent pattern.
You would think that that was fairly obvious, and yet it seems like this problem was it ever discussed publicly?
No. But to von Braun, this problem was very agonizing. He was planning the future U.S. moon program, but he knew that if an actual orbit did not match a calculated orbit, that was impossible.
So if he was actually aiming for an orbit around Earth and missing it, he realized he could not aim for an orbit or aim for the moon and get there.
Right.
it's very interesting because here you have a very particular situation, and they appear to discover free energy, and it's completely either ignored or it's not even interesting. It's just a problem they have to get eliminated at any cost.
Right. So, from von Braun's viewpoint, and this was the excellent detective work of Richard Hoagland that looked back into time and put this story together, otherwise it would have been lost forever. Von Braun was looking for what he would have thought of was a new physics, and something beyond Newton or Einstein or anyone else to explain why, in this first time the United States is launching something into orbit, it's going higher than it was really possible for it to go. So von Braun became famous, his writings were collected, and so it's proven that he wrote to scientists in Europe, for example, Burkhard Heim in Germany, and Maurice Allais in France, who were both working on theories related to gravity or experiments in that area. And he wanted some clues as to what was going on.
So he was looking for new explanations of gravity, and that is almost proof, right? He would not have been looking for that had he not seen these issues with his calculations and the discrepancies with the actual orbits versus what he was expecting.
Right, there would have been no need for him to do that.
Did he solve the problem?
When the United States later on had more conventional upper stages to put on top of their main booster, the problem went away. The extra free energy went away. So that was the solution, so to speak. And then von Braun knew he could design a U.S. moon program, and it was successful.
So for von Braun, at this point, everything started working as he wanted it to, and our problem went away and would have been forgotten, as you said, had it not been for the work of Richard Hoagland. What clued Hoagland into this?
Well, in the area about 2008, when Hoagland wrote his long article on the internet about this whole situation, Hoagland was led to establish communications with Bruce De Palma.
Bruce De Palma.
Bruce De Palma, the same Bruce De Palma we featured in video 18. So we humbly ask our viewers, if you have not seen video 18, please look at that, and that will provide an insight into what was occurring here in video 19. Now, in particular, Hoagland, when he communicated with De Palma, saw pictures from what's known as De Palma's spinning ball experiment. Now, we featured that in video 18. And then Hoagland said he was looking back into time to try to figure out what was really going on with this discrepancy between calculated and actual. And then Hoagland said he knew that during the satellite launches that had the extra high orbits, something was spinning.
Something was spinning.
But what?
But
what?
Okay, so we have a short movie clip from the launch of one of the Explorer missions, and we will see if our viewers can spot something spinning. And there we have it. All the upper stages were in fact spinning. And at the time of their firing, they were actually spinning at 750 RPM.
That's exactly right. The upper stages, we were told, required spinning to maintain guidance and even out any possible variation between these small solid rockets. They were fairly well calibrated, but in case some were more powerful than others, by spinning you would even that out and maintain the direction you wanted to be heading. So once there were so-called proper, more conventional upper stages, there was no more spinning, and that's why the problem went away.
Okay, so we had rockets with upper stages that were spinning quite rapidly, and that would consistently give us more speed, more energy, higher orbits than expected. And then once we got non-spinning upper stages, things worked according to calculations.
That's right.
Did von Braun ever make that connection? What do you think? He like, wow.
That's one of those questions we will not have an answer. As far as we know, he did not make that connection, but we can't see that for sure. He was a very smart man. He might have.
Or was so one point at that.
Right.
You know,
He just knew the
Now-
problem. His problem was solved. He knew that. So we'll never really know. But I'd like to make an observation. Just put that into this. And I call it a what if. Now, what if, when that had been discovered, that they were getting higher orbits than calculated, what if that had been recognized and then publicized in 1958?
in almost 60 years ago, that would have given us over 60 years, actually over 60 years ago, given us over 60 years of research into this phenomenon.
That's right.
And what would we have? Could be a different world.
Could be a different world. So that was the biggest discovery that could have resulted, but never did.
From the U.S. first launch
Very first launch.
into space.
Right.
That's a high-flying thought there, David. Maybe there will be more along those lines to cover in future videos, but I know you have something else planned for the next one.
Right. So for our next video, first of all, we'll be coming back down to Earth,
That'll be good.
and we won't be spinning.
And won't find ourselves in a galaxy far, far away.
No, none of that. Actually, what is planned is an invention that can, of free energy being released, that can be very useful in parts of the world that don't have access to electric power or fuels, and that will be understood when we present that.
Okay, that sounds good. And so, David, thank you for
Thank you.
taking us through this interesting topic. And to our viewers, thank you for watching, and we will
See you next video.